We live in an age where words have never been easier to share. A message can travel across the world in seconds. Conversations happen through screens at all hours. And yet, in the middle of all this connection, something strange happens. People go quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because something inside tells them that speaking won't change anything. That the energy it takes to explain, to defend, to translate their inner world into words the other person might not receive, simply isn't worth it anymore. Have you ever felt that? That moment when you realize the silence between you and someone you love isn't empty. It's full. Full of everything you stopped trying to say. Before we go deeper, if you're watching this and feel something stir inside you, subscribe to this channel. And if at any point you recognize yourself in these words, drop a comment. Tell me, when did you first notice yourself choosing silence over speech? Let's explore what's really happening in that space between two people when words disappear but feelings remain. Here is the contradiction no one talks about. Silence in a relationship is often seen as a sign of disconnection, of coldness, of someone who doesn't care enough to fight. But what if the opposite is true? What if the person who goes silent is the one who once cared too much? What if their silence isn't withdrawal but exhaustion? Not apathy but accumulated disappointment that no longer believes words will land the way they were meant to? There's a psychological term for this. Emotional burnout. It doesn't happen suddenly. It builds over time. Every misunderstood sentence. Every explanation that fell flat. Every time you opened your heart and felt like you were speaking into a void. Eventually, the mind begins to protect itself. It stops offering what isn't being received. This is not cruelty. This is survival. And yet, from the outside, it looks like you've stopped caring. Like you've given up. When really, you just ran out of ways to be heard. Silence in relationships often comes down to something deeper than communication style. It touches identity itself. When you speak and are misunderstood repeatedly, something shifts inside. You begin to question not just what you said, but who you are. Your sense of psychological ownership over your own thoughts starts to weaken. You begin to wonder if your feelings are even valid, if your perception of reality is accurate. This is where the concept of internal locus of control becomes essential. People with a strong internal locus believe their actions influence their outcomes. But when every attempt to communicate is met with resistance, dismissal, or conflict, that belief erodes. You begin to feel powerless. And powerlessness over time breeds silence. There's also something else at play. The dopamine system in the brain responds to anticipation and reward. When you speak and receive understanding, connection, warmth, your brain registers that as a reward. But when you speak and receive criticism, misunderstanding, or nothing at all, the reward disappears. Eventually, your brain stops anticipating any positive return from emotional expression. And so, you stop expressing, not because you chose to, but because something inside you quietly gave up trying. But let's pause here, because silence isn't always a wound. Sometimes it's wisdom. There's a difference between the silence of someone who has been hurt into withdrawal and the silence of someone who has grown into stillness. The first is reactive. The second is chosen. Some people discover, often after years of over-explaining, that not every emotion needs to be voiced. Not every thought deserves air. Not every argument requires their presence. They begin to understand that words, once spoken, cannot be taken back. And that sometimes the most powerful response is no response at all. This is self-restraint, not suppression. It is the quiet recognition that your peace is more valuable than proving a point. Let me ask you this. Think about a recent moment when you held your tongue in a relationship. Was it because you didn't know what to say? Or because you knew exactly what you would say and chose not to? There's a world of difference between those two silences. There will always be two paths in relationships. One leads toward noise, constant negotiation, endless explaining, trying to be seen through words, through effort, through performance. The other leads toward stillness, accepting that some people will never see you clearly, no matter how much you reveal, and choosing to protect your inner world rather than expose it to those who don't honor it. Neither path is entirely right or wrong. But the second path requires something the first doesn't. It requires you to find your own validation, to stop waiting for someone else to confirm that your feelings are real. This is the shift from external approval to internal peace. And it is quiet. It is invisible. But it changes everything. Let me be honest here. Not all silence is sacred. Sometimes silence becomes a wall, a way to punish, a refusal to grow. Some people use silence not to protect themselves, but to control others, to create distance that breeds anxiety in the people who love them. This kind of silence doesn't come from strength. It comes from fear. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of being seen. Fear that if they truly showed up, they might not be accepted. And this fear deserves compassion too, because behind every wall is someone who once had no other way to survive. Perhaps the deepest truth about silence in relationships is this. Not everything meaningful needs to be spoken. Some of the most profound things you carry inside will never be understood by another person. And that doesn't mean they're less real. It means they belong only to you. You are not required to translate every feeling. You are not obligated to explain your inner world to those who refuse to learn the language. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is let the silence be. Not as a statement, not as resistance, but as acceptance. You are allowed to be quiet. You are allowed to choose peace over performance. And you are allowed to walk through life without offering every piece of yourself to those who cannot hold you gently. Let this be the permission you didn't know you needed. To rest in the silence and trust that your truth exists, whether or not anyone else ever hears it. If this reached you in a way you didn't expect, leave a comment. Tell me, what does silence mean in your relationships? And if you want more reflections like this, subscribe. There's more to explore together.